Morning.
Thank you for the time today. Would you be able to just introduce yourself before we start the interview?
Okay, I'm Peter Jakob. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working with NVR for a very long time. I've developed a particular way of working with NVR for families with trauma. I think that's...
Okay.
That's enough.
And I'm Rachael, Alymer. I work for Partnership Projects with you as your Associate Director. And we're going to talk a bit today about the child-focused trauma work.
Okay.
I was just hoping that you could explain a little bit more about how you work with families and parents and caregivers to help them feel more emotionally and physically safe within NVR using child focus.
Well, and I'm glad you've asked the question that way, because I don't think we can talk about child-focused work without talking about how the family as a whole can come to a point of feeling emotionally safer. So I see the child-focused work as also requiring trauma-focused work in NVR with parents and work with the larger system around the family, so that the nuclear family, the parents, the children who are showing problematic behavior, their siblings, can feel safer within that larger community. And often, particularly in families that have experienced a lot of trauma, that isn't a given.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very often the starting point is that people around the family can actually feel emotionally unsafe to the family, and sometimes physically.
I'm also interested in you sharing with me what NVR methods are used to help traumatised parents.
Okay. Well, if we start with that view of the other adults around the family needing to become emotionally safe for parents and for children, one of the methods, as it were, is to work very, very carefully with the parent to identify how they actually respond to the input from other adults. Because many parents will experience other adults at times as being very critical of them, very prescriptive, taking over from them, yet they will often let that happen. And often because they have become so used to dominance from others, they won't even be in touch with their own discomfort. So I guess you could call it a method, is to sort of take the time to explore that with the parent, to imagine they're sitting with someone who is very involved with the family, and they're telling that person about some of the difficulties they're experiencing in responding to their child's harmful behavior or self-destructive behavior, and then to check what's actually going on inside of me. I like to ask them to focus their awareness on their physical responses, on their body reactions, to look for discomfort or comfort in their body. So if they feel very comfortable in the face of, imagining another adult there, then that other adult is probably emotionally safe. If they experience discomfort in their body, tension in certain parts of the body, or just recently I worked with someone who felt sick, then there is probably a disturbance in the relationship. There are probably elements of feeling criticized, of feeling not taken seriously, or other things that get in the way of the supportive relationship. That's one area of work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why Why have you developed a child-friendly way in working in NVR, and what are the methods you've used to do this?
Okay. The reason I've developed a child-friendly, I like that child-friendly way of working in NVR, is that many of the families I work with, whether they're birth families, whether they are foster families or adoptive families, there are children who have experienced abuse or other early childhood difficulties. Yet, because of their problematic behavior, we don't see, hear, feel their needs. You know? What we see is the aggression up front. I don't work on the assumption that any aggressive act, any harmful behavior, any act of harmful behavior is immediately driven by need or by distress. But what I do feel is that where there is unmet need, we are less aware of it, the child is less aware of their own need. And we have this wonderful opportunity in NVR by operating with reconciliation gestures to actually use the reconciliation gestures to address unmet need in the child, to focus the adult's mind on the unmet need of the child, to help the adult to sensitize herself or himself for what might be going on that even the child is not that aware of yet. So that the adult and the child can get into a dialogue which is around the child's needs and the parent's care for the child in response to those needs. So that is why I've developed that child-focused, or as you say, child-friendly way of working. The other part to that is that often parents can be so traumatized that they feel cut off from their caring impulses for the child. So we're kind of working on two planes at the same time. We're working on using the reconciliation gestures to address need in the child, but we're also working on helping the parents get in touch with their strength through using NVR methods as trauma-focused methods, so that from that position of feeling stronger, they can find it in themselves to reattune to the child.
What is unique about trauma-based NVR, and why is it different to other trauma work?
Well, a lot of people introduce trauma-focused methods when they're working with parents within the broader framework of NVR. So some people will use EMDR, other people might use trauma-focused CBT methods, and that's very constructive often. I think the difference is that I see the NVR positive action methods as trauma-focused methods in and of themselves. When you go back to Rosa Parks, for example, wrote about fear. And she wrote that once you've decided what needs to be done and you're determined to do it, your fear becomes diminished. So Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, these proponents of political nonviolent resistance saw the resistance as something that helps transform the resistor psychologically, as something that can help overcome fear. And I would probably add other difficult emotions. And just to use an example, if you think of a sit-in in NVR, where the parent enters the child's room, sits down peacefully, addresses a recent incident of aggressive or harmful behavior, and asks for a solution. Parents will often have been very scared of that. It will be breaking a rule as it were, that the child has set up. You must never challenge me about my behavior. The parent does it in spite of that. The parent does it in spite of her fear of what the child might do. She does it in spite of the way she anticipates that she could feel humiliated in front of her friend who's supporting her because of what the child might say. And in doing so, she's no longer avoiding that. And by no longer avoiding that, she has the opportunity to overcome her anxiety. In behavioral psychology, you call that systematic desensitization, which is exposing yourself to triggers, to anxiety triggers under controlled conditions. In NVR, the conditions are very controlled because we plan such kinds of action like the sitting so carefully. Some people see a difference between resisting problematic behavior in a child and connecting with the child. I do not see those kinds of acts as opposites. I feel that a lot of acts, even of resisting harmful behavior, are connective in and of themselves, because in the past the parent may have avoided the child. By becoming present to protest what the child has done, the parent is re-entering the relationship with the child. That is already connective, particularly because the parent does it in a way that is neither threatening to the child nor anxiously avoidant. If you look at the research on particular kinds of attachment disorders, for example, the research on disordered attachment, what you see is that factors involved in disorganized attachment are often subtle: avoidance of the child, anxious avoidance of the child, anxious responses to the child, or different kinds of hostile responses to the child. They can be anger-driven responses to the child. They can be ridiculing of the child. They can be not taking the child seriously. So what you have in a sit-in, for example, that is very carefully planned, is a challenge to the problematic behavior, but one that reverses that kind of interaction because the adult is calm enough. The adult does not anxiously avoid the child. The adult is not hostile. And I think that that is already connective, with the addition of using reconciliation gestures as a means of strengthening the parent's attunement and sensitivity to the child's needs, and giving the child the message that the parent appreciates that there are unmet needs and gets it, and that it's okay to be vulnerable. That becomes even more powerful.